There are moments in your life that arrive disguised as something ordinary, like a Tuesday night or a half-watched movie, and they hollow you out from the inside, creating a space you never knew was empty. They don't announce themselves with thunder or lightning, but with a shift in the air, a change in the weight of a hand on your shoulder, or the sudden, deafening silence that follows a whispered sentence. These are the moments that become the architecture of your memory, the load-bearing walls upon which the rest of your story is built. For me, that moment smelled like the cheap fabric softener I used on my blankets and the faint, clean scent of Leo's shampoo. It was the moment a friendship that had been a harbor for years suddenly felt like a vast, terrifying, and open ocean, and I was adrift in it, with no land in sight. He had said he needed me. It was a simple, fractured statement, muttered into the collar of my shirt as he pressed his face against my chest. The words were not a request, but a confession, stripped bare of the usual bravado that clothed him like a second skin. On my couch, with the blue light of a muted television screen painting shadows across the room, Leo was not the brilliant, laughing man who could command any room he entered. He was something elemental, a creature of pure, unvarnished need. And I, who had spent the better part of a decade meticulously building walls around the part of my heart that belonged to him, felt them crumble into dust at the sound. He was holding on to me, not in the casual, friendly way we had 100 times before, but with a desperate strength that spoke of shipwreck and survival. His arms were wrapped around my torso, his fingers digging into the fabric of my hoodie, as if he were afraid a current might pull him away. His long legs, usually so full of restless energy, were tangled with mine, and the heat of him seeped through my clothes, a warmth that felt both like a homecoming and a profound trespass. My own arms were frozen at my sides for a long moment, my entire being a study in suspended animation. Every instinct screamed at me to hold him back, to offer the comfort he was so clearly seeking, but a colder, more rational part of my brain, the part that had kept me safe for so long, was sounding an alarm. This was a line. It was a beautiful, hazy, undefined line, but we were crossing it, and I knew, with the certainty of a photographer knowing the exact moment the light will break, that nothing would be the same after. To touch him back would be to admit something I had never allowed to breathe in the space between us. It would be an answer to a question he hadn't even asked, a question he probably didn't even know existed. But to deny him, to remain a passive anchor in his storm, felt like a cruelty I was incapable of inflicting. So, slowly, with the hesitance of a man disarming a bomb, I raised my hands and settled them on his back. His shoulders were broad and solid beneath my palms, the muscles tight with a tension that seemed to have taken up permanent residence there. As if my touch was a signal, a permission he had been waiting for, he let out a shuddering breath, a sound that was half sob, half sigh, and burrowed even closer, until I could feel the frantic, unsteady rhythm of his heart beating against my own. The movie played on, a meaningless flicker of color and motion in the periphery. My world had contracted to this single point of contact, to the weight of him, the sound of his breathing, the overwhelming, terrifying, and exquisite agony of having him this close. I was acutely aware of everything. The way a lock of his dark hair tickled my chin, the scent of rain on his jacket from when he'd arrived, the almost imperceptible tremor in his hands. My mind, a relentless cataloger of details, was archiving this moment, storing it away in a place reserved for things too precious and too painful to look at directly. This was Leo, my best friend, my straight best friend, and he was holding on to me like I was the only solid thing in a world that had turned to water. The irony was a bitter pill. For years, he had been my anchor, the one constant in my own turbulent life, and now our roles were reversed. But the weight of him was different. It wasn't just the physical pressure, it was the emotional gravity of it, a pull so strong I felt my own carefully constructed orbit begin to decay. He needed me, and God help me, I had always needed him. The silence in the room stretched, filled only by the murmur of the television and the sound of our breathing, which had, impossibly, begun to fall into a shared rhythm. And in that quiet, I felt a single, devastating thought rise to the surface. I would let him break my heart 1,000 times over, if it meant I could give him this. To understand the seismic nature of that night, You have to understand the foundation it was built upon. Leo and I were a study in contrasts, a friendship that should not have worked on paper. We met in college, two freshmen thrown together by the arbitrary lottery of adjoining dorm rooms and a shared spot on the university swim team. He was the sun, and I was the satellite caught in his orbit. Leo was all bright, kinetic energy, a supernova of easy smiles and effortless charisma. He moved through the world with an unshakable confidence that I could only ever dream of. He was the star sprinter, the one who could shave milliseconds off his time with a raw, explosive power that left the rest of us breathless. His laughter was loud and frequent, echoing in the cavernous natatorium and filling the cramped dorm hallways. He collected friends like other people collected stamps, each one a testament to his magnetic personality. I, on the other hand, was a creature of the quiet depths, a distance swimmer. My strength was not in explosive bursts but in endurance, in the steady, meditative rhythm of pulling myself through the water, lap after lap, alone with the sound of my own breathing and the distorted blue light filtering from above. Where Leo was loud, I was quiet. Where he was all forward momentum, I was an observer, finding my place on the periphery. My passion was not the roar of the crowd, but the silent click of a camera shutter. I saw the world through a viewfinder, finding beauty in the overlooked details. The way the chlorine-scented mist caught the afternoon light over the pool, the exhaustion etched on a teammate's face after a grueling practice, the fleeting, unguarded expression on Leo's face in the rare moments he thought no one was watching. My camera was both a shield and a bridge, allowing me to engage with the world from a safe distance, to capture its beauty without having to be at the center of it. Our friendship bloomed in the spaces between our differences. It was forged in the early morning darkness of 5 a.m. practices, in the shared misery of ice baths, and the delirious exhaustion of long bus rides to away meets. Leo, for all his social grace, seemed to appreciate my quiet presence. He never pushed me to be more outgoing, never teased me for preferring a book or my darkroom to a raucous party. Instead, he would seek me out, collapsing onto the spare bed in my dorm room, which was neater and less chaotic than his, and he would just talk. He'd talk about the pressure from his coach, the complexities of his engineering coursework, the endless, dizzying drama of his romantic life. I became his confidant, his sounding board, the calm center in his whirlwind existence. I listened, and I learned the cartography of his heart, mapping out his fears, his ambitions, his vulnerabilities. I learned that his confidence was a well-constructed armor, hiding a deep-seated fear of letting people down. I learned that his endless energy was often a frantic attempt to outrun a persistent, unnamed restlessness. And somewhere in those late-night conversations, in the shared silence of studying for exams, in the easy camaraderie of our shared athletic life, I fell in love with him. It wasn't a sudden, cataclysmic event. It was a slow, creeping dawn, a gradual realization that the warmth I felt in his presence was more than just friendship. It was in the way my stomach would tighten when he smiled at me from across the pool deck, the way I found myself unconsciously searching for his face in a crowded room, the way his casual touches, a hand on my shoulder, a playful shove, would send a jolt through my entire system. I recognized the feeling for what it was, and I was terrified. Leo was a fixed point in the celestial map of my life, a constant I had come to rely on. He was also, unequivocally, straight. His life was a revolving door of bright, beautiful girlfriends, each one seemingly more perfect than the last. He would tell me about them, analyzing first dates and agonizing over anniversaries, completely oblivious to the quiet devastation his words were wreaking on me. So I did what I did best. I observed. I documented. I packed my feelings away in a light-proof box in the darkroom of my heart, a roll of undeveloped film I knew I could never expose. My love for him became another secret detail to capture, a subtle play of light and shadow that only I could see. I poured it into my art. He became my unwitting muse. My portfolio from those years is filled with him. Leo, laughing, with water beating on his shoulders. Leo, pensive, staring out the window of a moving bus. Leo, asleep, his face softened and vulnerable in the dim light of my desk lamp. Each photograph was a love letter I could never send, a way of holding on to him without ever having to risk the fragile, precious architecture of our friendship. I told myself it was enough. Being his friend, his confidant, his quiet harbor, it had to be enough. Because the alternative, the thought of losing him altogether, was a darkness I couldn't bear to contemplate. Our friendship was the most important thing in my life, and I would sooner cut off my own arm than jeopardize it. So I learned to live with the quiet ache, the constant, low-grade hum of unrequited love. It became a part of my landscape, a familiar shadow that followed me everywhere. And for a long time, it was a sustainable peace. That peace held for nearly a decade, a testament to my carefully constructed defenses. We graduated, and our lives diverged in practice, but not in spirit. Leo went on to a high-powered consulting job that sent him flying across the country, solving complex problems for faceless corporations. He thrived on the pace, the challenge, the constant motion. I, predictably, chose a quieter path. I became a freelance photographer, turning my passion into a modest living. I specialized in portraiture and architectural photography, finding stories in the lines of a person's face and the history of a building's design. Our lives were different, but our bond remained. We were the anchors for each other's ships. No matter where he was in the world, he would call. We had a standing weekly video chat that was as sacred as any religious rite. When he was home, my apartment was his first stop. It was the one place he could shed the skin of the high-flying consultant and just be Leo. The restless energy would settle, the performative charm would soften, and he would collapse on my worn leather couch as if he had finally reached his destination. His romantic life continued its predictable pattern. There was always a girlfriend, and they were always impressive in some way. An ambitious lawyer, a free-spirited artist, a brilliant doctor. The latest, and most serious, had been Clara. She was an architect, sharp and witty and beautiful, and for a while, I thought she might be the one to finally anchor him. They were together for 2 years, a record for Leo. They moved in together. They talked about the future. And I, as always, played my part. I listened to his anxieties about commitment, offered neutral advice, and attended their dinner parties, smiling politely while a familiar, dull ache settled behind my ribs. I liked Clara, truly. She was good for him. She challenged him, and she seemed to understand the deep well of restlessness that drove him. But I also saw the subtle cracks in their foundation. I saw the way Leo's eyes would sometimes glaze over when she talked about 5-year plans, the way he still sought refuge in the quiet of my apartment, a space that was entirely his and mine, free from the shared obligations of his life with her. I saw it, but I never spoke of it. It was not my place. My place was to be the friend, the constant, the unchangeable variable in the complex equation of his life. The shift, when it came, was not a gradual erosion but a sudden, violent fracture. It started with a phone call, a terse, static-filled conversation from an airport lounge in Chicago. Leo's voice was hollow, stripped of its usual warmth. "It's over," he said, the words stark and unadorned. "Clara and I. It's done." I didn't ask for details. I just listened to the strained silence on the other end of the line, a silence so heavy it felt like I could feel its weight through the phone. I waited. "She said I'm a ghost," he finally continued, his voice barely a whisper, "that I'm never really there, even when I'm sitting right next to her. She said I live my life like I'm waiting for a train that's never going to come." The accuracy of her observation was a physical blow. It was something I had long recognized in him, but had never been able to name. He was always in motion, always looking toward the next thing, the next city, the next project, as if he were afraid of what might happen if he stood still for too long. "I'm coming home," he said, and then the line went dead. He didn't mean the apartment he shared with Clara. He meant my apartment. That had been our shorthand for years. Home was not a place, but a state of being, and for him, it was the worn couch in my living room. He arrived 2 days later, looking like a refugee. He was thinner, his face pale and drawn, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights spent in sterile hotel rooms. He didn't bring a suitcase, just a backpack slung over one shoulder. He walked into my apartment without a word, dropped the bag by the door, and stood in the middle of my living room, looking lost and untethered, a ship whose moorings had been cut. He looked at me, and his carefully constructed armor was gone. All I could see was the exhaustion, the confusion, and a loneliness so profound it seemed to radiate from him in waves. "She was right, Jules," he said, his voice raw. "I don't know how to stay." That was the beginning. The fracture in his life became a crack in the wall between us, a fissure through which something new and dangerous began to seep. He was adrift, and he had instinctively navigated his way to my harbor. But this time, he wasn't just docking for a brief respite. This time, it felt like he was dropping anchor. He stayed on my couch that night, and the next, and the night after that. The pretense of him going back to his own place, of sorting through the wreckage of his relationship with Clara, faded away. My apartment became his sanctuary, and his presence began to reshape the very atmosphere of my quiet, ordered life. The change was subtle at first, a series of small alterations to my daily rhythm. It was the scent of his coffee mingling with mine in the morning, the sound of his keys in the lock at the end of the day, the sight of his running shoes kicked off by the door. It was the comfortable, domestic silence of sharing a space, of coexisting without the need for constant conversation. This was the soil in which the ritual began to grow. It started innocently enough. We would end our days on the couch, watching old movies or sports, a comfortable habit from our college years revived. Exhausted from work and emotionally drained from the slow, painful process of disentangling his life from Clara's, he would inevitably fall asleep. His head would droop, his breathing would deepen, and then, with a soft sigh, he would list sideways until his head was resting on my shoulder. The first time it happened, my entire body went rigid. It was an accidental, unconscious act, a simple matter of gravity and exhaustion, but it felt like a momentous event. His hair was soft against my neck, and his warmth was a tangible, living thing. I sat there for over an hour, my muscles aching from the stillness, not daring to move, not daring to breathe too deeply, lest I wake him. I studied the sharp angle of his jaw, the faint stubble on his chin, the way his eyelashes cast long shadows on his cheeks in the dim light. It was a proximity I had never allowed myself to imagine, and it was both a sweet torture and a profound gift. Soon, it became the unspoken rule of our evenings. We would settle on the couch, and at some point, he would drift off, his body naturally gravitating toward mine. The initial awkwardness was replaced by a quiet acceptance. He would shift, find a comfortable position against my side, and I would let him. I told myself it was what any good friend would do. He was hurting. He needed comfort. He needed a safe place to land, and I was that place. My role was to be solid, to be still, to be the anchor. But my heart knew it was more than that. Every night was a tightrope walk, a delicate balance between my duty as a friend and the overwhelming desire of a man in love. I became a scholar of his sleeping habits, an expert in the subtle language of his unconscious touch. I learned the difference between the light brush of his fingers against my arm and the more deliberate way his hand would sometimes find mine, his fingers loosely intertwining with my own as if seeking out a connection even in his dreams. I would hold my breath, my heart hammering against my ribs, convinced he would wake up, realize what he was doing, and pull away in a panic. But he never did. He would just hold on, his grip slack but persistent, and I would be left to wonder what it meant. The ritual escalated. One night, he woke with a groan, stretching his long frame and complaining about his back. "This couch is killing me," he mumbled, his voice thick with sleep. He looked at me, his eyes hazy and unfocused. Would it be weird if I? He trailed off, the question hanging in the air between us. My heart stopped. I knew what he was asking. He was asking to share my bed, which was my most private, solitary space. A million alarms went off in my head, screaming about boundaries and self-preservation. But the exhausted, vulnerable look on his face silenced them all. "No," I heard myself say, my voice surprisingly steady. "It's not weird." That night was the beginning of a new, more intense form of torture. My queen-sized bed, which had always felt spacious, suddenly felt impossibly small. He fell asleep almost instantly, but I lay awake for hours, hyper-aware of his presence beside me. I could feel the heat radiating from his body, could hear every soft breath he took. I constructed a rigid wall of pillows and blankets down the center of the bed, a physical boundary to represent the emotional one I was so desperate to maintain. But sleep was a great dismantler of walls. In the middle of the night, I would wake to find the barrier gone, to find him turned toward me, one arm thrown across my chest, his face just inches from mine. His breath would be warm on my skin, and the clean, familiar scent of him would fill my senses. In these stolen moments of darkness, I would allow myself to pretend. I would pretend that this was not an accident, that this proximity was intentional, that this was not just the unconscious seeking of comfort, but a conscious act of affection. And then the sun would rise, and the pretense would evaporate with the morning light. He would wake up, stretch, and act as if nothing had happened, as if sleeping in my bed, tangled in my limbs, was the most natural thing in the world for two best friends to do. His plausible deniability was a masterpiece of unintentional cruelty. Because he never acknowledged it, I could never question it. To ask, "What does this mean?" would be to shatter the fragile illusion that this was all perfectly normal. It would expose my own feelings, my own yearning, and risk the very foundation of our friendship. So I said nothing. I allowed the ritual to continue, to deepen. The wall of pillows disappeared. The accidental touches became more frequent. Some nights, he would reach for me in his sleep, pulling me closer until my back was pressed against his chest, his arms securely around my waist, his chin resting on the top of my head. I would lie there, eyes wide open in the darkness, my body thrumming with a mixture of bliss and terror. This was a dangerous game, and I had no idea what the rules were, or if he even knew he was playing. Was he truly asleep? Or was this his way of reaching for something he couldn't ask for in the light of day? The ambiguity was a slow poison. It filled my days with anxious analysis and my nights with a hope so fierce it felt like a physical pain. I was living in a liminal space, a gray area between friendship and something more, and the uncertainty was hollowing me out. The more he held on to me, the more I felt myself disappearing. I was becoming a ghost in my own life, my existence defined only by his need, my own needs and desires relegated to the silent, watchful hours of the night. The boy who had learned to love from a distance was now being consumed by a proximity he didn't know how to navigate. The crossing happened on a Thursday. There was nothing remarkable about the day itself. It was gray and drizzly, the kind of day that encourages introspection and quiet melancholy. Leo had come home from work late, looking weary down to his bones. A major project he'd been leading had hit a critical snag, and he'd spent the week in a state of simmering stress. We skipped the pretense of a movie, falling into bed in a shared, exhausted silence. For a long time, we just lay there on our respective sides, the familiar space between us feeling more like a chasm than a small divide. The only sound was the gentle patter of rain against the window pane. I thought he was asleep, his breathing deep and even, and I was just beginning to drift off myself when his voice, quiet and unexpectedly clear, cut through the darkness. "Jules?" My eyes snapped open. "Yeah," I answered, my own voice rough with impending sleep. He was quiet for a long moment, and I could feel the shift in the air, the gathering of a storm. When he spoke again, his voice was different. It was stripped of its exhaustion, and in its place was a raw, trembling vulnerability I had never heard before. "Are you happy?" The question was so unexpected, so vast, that I didn't know how to answer it. Happy. It was a concept that felt distant, like a country I'd only read about in books. My life was a series of managed states, contentment, quiet satisfaction, the dull ache of longing. Happiness felt like too bright a color for my muted palate. "I don't know," I finally admitted, the words a stark confession in the quiet room. "Sometimes. Are you?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "God, no. I don't think I even know what it is anymore. I run. I work, I travel, I date. It's all just running. And the only time I feel like I can stop is when I'm here." He rolled onto his side to face me. In the faint light filtering in from the street, I could just make out the dark shape of his silhouette, the intensity of his unseen gaze. "With you." The words landed in the center of my chest like stones, heavy and real. My breath caught in my throat. This was new territory. This was not the language of sleep or plausible deniability. This was conscious, it was deliberate, and it was terrifying. "You make things quiet," he whispered. "My head. It's so loud all the time. But when I'm here, it just stops. You're like a safe harbor." "No, that's not right. You're like home." Home. The word he had used before, but this time it felt different. It was imbued with a meaning that went beyond the physical space of my apartment. He was talking about me. I was his home. The thought was so overwhelming, so profoundly moving, that I couldn't speak. I could only lie there, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs, and listen. He moved closer, the mattress dipping with his weight. The warmth of his body was no longer an accidental comfort, but an intentional presence. He reached out a hand, his fingers gently tracing the line of my jaw, a touch so light it was like the brush of a moth's wing. My skin erupted in goosebumps. Every nerve ending was on fire. "Jules," he breathed, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. It was a cocktail of fear and longing and a desperate, searching hope. "I don't understand any of this. My head is a mess. But the only thing that makes any sense right now." He paused, and the silence stretched for an eternity. I held my breath, waiting for the rest of the sentence, for the revelation or the retreat that was sure to follow. "Would it be okay?" he whispered, his thumb stroking my cheek. "Would it be okay if I kissed you?" The question was a detonation. It shattered the carefully constructed glass walls of our friendship into a million pieces. It was a question that offered me a choice, a question that acknowledged the line and asked for permission to cross it. It was the most terrifying and beautiful thing anyone had ever said to me. For a split second, the gatekeeper in my mind, the protector of my fragile heart, screamed no. It screamed that this was a mistake, that he was confused and lonely and I was just a port in a storm, that this would ruin everything. But then I looked into the darkness where his eyes were, and I felt the tremor in the hand that was touching my face, and I knew that he was just as terrified as I was. This was not an act of careless impulse. This was a leap of faith, and he was asking me to leap with him. And in that moment, all the years of silent longing, of carefully guarded affection, of resigned acceptance, coalesced into a single, simple truth. I would rather have the wreckage of this than the safety of what we had before. I didn't trust my voice, so I just nodded. A small, almost imperceptible movement. But he saw it. He leaned in, his movements slow and tentative, giving me every opportunity to pull away. But I didn't. I met him halfway. His lips were soft, hesitant at first, a gentle, questioning pressure against mine. It was not a kiss of passion or demand, but one of profound, heartbreaking vulnerability. It was a confession. It was a question and an answer all at once. It tasted of rain and salt and a loneliness so deep it felt ancient. I brought my hand up to cup the back of his neck, my fingers tangling in his soft hair, and kissed him back. I poured every unspoken word, every secret photograph, every ounce of the love I had kept hidden for a decade into that single, gentle motion. A sound escaped his throat, a soft, wounded noise, and he deepened the kiss, his other arm coming around me, pulling me flush against him. There were no more barriers, no more space, no more ambiguity. There was just this. The quiet rain, the darkness of my room, and the impossible, undeniable truth of his lips on mine. The world had shifted on its axis. The line had been crossed. And I knew, with a terrifying and exhilarating certainty, that I could never, ever go back. The morning after was a study in silence and absence. I woke slowly, coming up through the layers of the most profound sleep I'd had in months, a deep, dreamless peace born of emotional exhaustion and a quiet, settled joy. The first thing I registered was the empty space beside me. The sheets were cool. I reached out a hand, my fingers brushing against the indentation his head had left on the pillow, the last lingering trace of his warmth already fading. My eyes opened to a room filled with the pale, unforgiving light of dawn. He was gone. His shoes were missing from their usual spot by the door, and the mug he used for his morning coffee was clean and dry in the dish rack. He had slipped out before I woke, a ghost leaving the scene of a haunting. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, chilling the warmth left over from the night before. I told myself there were 1,000 rational explanations. He had an early meeting. He didn't want to wake me. He had to go to his old apartment to pick something up. But the silence of my apartment felt different. It was no longer the comfortable, companionable silence we had shared. It was a hollow, ringing void. The quiet that he had claimed to love, the quiet I had offered him, had been broken, and something sharp and anxious had taken its place. I picked up my phone. There were no messages. No, had to run. See you later. No, thanks for last night. Nothing. Just the blank, indifferent screen staring back at me. The day passed in a slow-motion blur. I tried to work, editing a series of architectural shots I'd taken the week before, but the stark, clean lines of the buildings on my screen seemed to mock the messy, undefined chaos in my head. I couldn't focus. My mind kept replaying the kiss, dissecting every detail. The hesitation in his voice, the softness of his lips, the desperate way he had held me. It had felt so real, so significant. Had I imagined it? Had I misinterpreted a moment of lonely confusion as a declaration of something more? The doubt was a corrosive acid, eating away at the fragile hope that had taken root in my heart. By evening, the anxiety had curdled into a knot of hurt and anger in my stomach. He had initiated it. He had asked. He had crossed the line, and then he had vanished, leaving me alone with the consequences, with the beautiful, terrible wreckage of what he had done to our friendship. The silence from him was no longer just an absence. It was a statement. It was a retreat. It was a rejection. His text came just after 9 o'clock, a single, cowardly sentence that made my hands tremble. "Hey, sorry for bugging out this morning. Long day. Can we talk tomorrow? Can we talk?" The four most dreaded words in the English language. They were the words of damage control, of backtracking, of gentle letdowns. I stared at the message, the blue light of the screen illuminating the frustration on my face. I was not going to let him do this. I was not going to let him reframe what had happened as a mistake to be managed. I deserved more than a day of radio silence followed by a scheduled, sterile conversation. I deserved honesty. I typed back before I could lose my nerve. "Talk now. Meet me at the bridge." The pedestrian bridge over the river was our neutral ground. It was a place we'd gone to for years to have difficult conversations, a place suspended between the two sides of the city, exposed to the elements, with no walls to hide behind. It was a place for truths. He agreed with a simple, one-word reply. "Okay." I was there first. I stood in the middle of the bridge, leaning against the railing, watching the dark, swirling water below. The night was cold, and the wind whipped around me, but I barely felt it. My insides were a churning storm of their own. I saw him approaching, his silhouette a familiar shape against the distant city lights. He walked with his head down, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his jacket. He looked smaller, diminished, the easy confidence he usually wore completely stripped away. He stopped a few feet away from me, not meeting my eyes, his gaze fixed on some point in the middle distance. "Hey," he said, his voice quiet, carried away by the wind. "Don't," I said, my tone sharper than I intended. "Don't start with hey as if nothing happened. What was last night, Leo?" He finally looked at me, and his eyes were full of a pain and confusion so profound it almost broke my resolve. He looked like a man caught in a trap of his own making. "I don't know," he whispered, and the words were a punch to the gut. "You don't know?" I repeated, my voice rising with disbelief. "You're the one who asked. You're the one who kissed me, and now you don't know? That's not good enough." "Jules, please," he pleaded, taking a step closer. "I'm so sorry. I never should have. It was a mistake. A mistake." The word landed with the force of a physical blow. All the air went out of my lungs. I had prepared myself for confusion, for hesitation, but not for this. Not for a complete and utter negation of what had felt so real, so mutual. "A mistake?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Was it a mistake all those nights you fell asleep on my shoulder? Was it a mistake when you held my hand? Was it a mistake every single time you crawled into my bed and held onto me like I was a goddamn life raft? Or was it only a mistake when you finally had the courage to put a name to it?" He flinched, looking away again, staring down at the dark water. "It's not like that." "Then what is it like, Leo?" I demanded, stepping into his space, forcing him to look at me. "Tell me, for once in your life, stop running and tell me the truth. What is going on in your head?" He looked utterly broken. "I don't know what I'm doing," he said, his voice cracking. "Everything is a mess. My job, Clara, my whole life feels like it's falling apart. And you're the only thing that's solid. The only thing that feels real. I was lonely, and I was hurting, and being with you feels safe. So I'm a safety blanket," I said, the bitterness coating my tongue. "I'm a convenient comfort when your world goes to hell. Is that it?" "No," he insisted, his eyes flashing with a desperate sincerity. "No, it's more than that. You have to know it's more than that. You're my best friend. You're the most important person in my life. And last night, it felt right. In the moment, It felt so incredibly right. It was the first thing that's felt right in months. But then I woke up this morning, and the sun was coming up, and I looked at you, and I panicked. Because this isn't me, Jules. This isn't who I am. This isn't who I am. The words were a wall between us, a final, insurmountable barrier. He had allowed himself a moment of emotional honesty in the dark, but in the light of day, his identity, his perception of himself as a straight man, had reasserted itself. The kiss had been a deviation from the script of his life, and he was terrified. He was trying to put things back in their neat, familiar boxes, and I was the messy, inconvenient truth that wouldn't fit. I felt a profound, weary sadness settle over me. The anger was gone, replaced by a deep, aching hurt. He wasn't being malicious. He was just scared, but his fear was destroying me. I can't do this anymore, Leo, I said, my voice quiet but firm. I took a step back, reclaiming my space, rebuilding my walls. I can't be your safe harbor if I'm the one who's drowning. I can't be the one you hold on to at night and pretend doesn't exist in the morning. It's not fair. It's not fair to me. His face crumpled. What are you saying? I'm saying you need to figure out what you want. And you need to do it somewhere else. The words felt like tearing a part of myself away, but I knew they were necessary. My heart, which had been so carefully guarded for so long, was now exposed and bleeding, and I had to protect what was left of it. Go stay at a hotel. Go stay with another friend. I don't care. But you can't stay with me. Not like this. He just stared at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock and hurt. He looked like he wanted to say something, to argue, to plead. But he didn't. He just gave a small, defeated nod. He turned and walked away without another word, his retreating back a symbol of the vast, cold distance that had suddenly opened up between us. I stayed on the bridge for a long time after he was gone, the wind a poor substitute for the warmth of his presence, feeling the agonizing truth of what I had just done. I had sent my home away because I finally realized that a house is not a home if you are not safe within its walls. The silence that followed was a physical presence in my apartment. It was heavier, more profound than any quiet I had ever known. For the first few days, I kept expecting to hear his key in the lock, to see him walk through the door with a peace offering of takeout and an apology on his lips. But the door remained closed. The emptiness of the space he had occupied was a constant, painful reminder of his absence. The other side of the bed was a cold, vast territory. The couch looked strangely forlorn. I found one of his hoodies draped over a chair, and the scent of him that clung to the fabric was so overwhelming that I had to put it in a plastic bag and hide it in the back of my closet. I was living in a museum of our friendship, surrounded by the ghosts of 1,000 shared moments. I tried to convince myself that I had done the right thing. I had chosen self-preservation over the slow, agonizing death by 1,000 cuts that his confused affection had become. But the logic of it offered little comfort. My heart felt like a hollowed-out cavern, echoing with the loss of him. He was not just the man I loved. He was the bedrock of my life, the friend who knew me better than anyone. And I had pushed him away. The fear that I had made a catastrophic, irreversible mistake was a constant companion. What if his confusion had just been a momentary panic? What if, by demanding clarity, I had scared him away for good? What if I had just destroyed the most important relationship of my life over a single, beautiful, disastrous kiss? A week went by, a week of silence. I didn't reach out, and neither did he. It was a miserable, stubborn stalemate. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra projects, working late into the night, doing anything to keep my mind from circling back to him. I was in my darkroom, the red light casting an eerie glow over everything, developing a set of black and white portraits, when I heard the knock. It wasn't the confident, familiar rap that Leo always used. It was a soft, hesitant tapping, almost apologetic. My heart leaped into my throat. I wiped my chemical-stained hands on my jeans and walked to the door, my legs feeling unsteady. I looked through the peephole. It was him. He was just standing there, his shoulders slumped, looking at the floor. He looked as tired and as miserable as I felt. I took a deep breath and opened the door. He looked up, and his eyes were red-rimmed. He had a small, overnight bag in one hand. He didn't try to smile. He just looked at me, his expression a raw plea. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice hoarse. I stepped aside, and he walked past me into the living room. He dropped his bag and turned to face me, standing in the same spot where he had stood the day he arrived after his breakup with Clara. The symmetry was not lost on me. I stayed at a hotel, he began, his voice low. It was awful. The silence was so loud. I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think. All I could do was miss you. The confession was simple, unadorned, and it undid me completely. He took a hesitant step closer. You were right. On the bridge. You were right about everything. I was scared. I was a coward. I hurt you. And I am so sorry, Jules. I just nodded, unable to speak past the lump that had formed in my throat. I spent this entire week trying to put myself back in the box, he continued, his gaze unwavering. Trying to convince myself that last night was just a symptom of all the other chaos in my life. A momentary lapse. But it wasn't. The lie wasn't the kiss. The lie was everything before it. The lie was me pretending that you were just my friend. He took another step, closing the distance between us. I love you. I think I've been in love with you for a very long time, and I was just too terrified to see it. You're not my safe harbor, Jules. You're the destination. You're the place I was running to all along, and I didn't even know it. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. I had dreamed of hearing those words for so long that they didn't feel real. They felt like something my own heart had conjured up out of sheer desperation. Leo, I whispered, my voice breaking. I don't have it all figured out, he said, his own eyes glistening. I'm still scared, and I don't know what this looks like or what we do now. But I know one thing for sure. He reached out and gently took my hand, his fingers warm and firm around mine. I don't want to do it without you. I can't. I miss my best friend. I miss my home. And with that, the last of my walls crumbled. I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around him, burying my face in his shoulder, and he held me back, his arms a tight, secure circle around me. It was not the desperate, clinging hold from that first night on the couch. This was different. This was solid. It was sure. It was a promise. We just stood there for a long time, in the middle of my living room, holding each other, the silence no longer a void but a space filled with 1,000 unspoken things, 1,000 shared memories, and the fragile, terrifying, beautiful beginning of a new chapter. We began again, not as friends, not as lovers, but as something in between, something new that we were building together, one tentative, honest conversation at a time. The ambiguity was gone, replaced by a quiet, deliberate intentionality. The first night he stayed after our reconciliation, we lay in bed, a careful foot of space between us, the memory of our conflict still a palpable presence in the room. But this time, the silence was not for hiding. He turned to face me in the darkness. Can I hold your hand? He asked, his voice soft. The question was an offering, a request for permission that acknowledged everything that had come before. It was not the unconscious seeking of a sleeping man, but the conscious choice of a waking one. Yes, I whispered. He reached across the space between us, and his fingers intertwined with mine. His touch was warm and steady, and we fell asleep like that, connected by that single, simple point of contact, a bridge built across the chasm of our fear. The grand, passionate romance I might have once dreamed of never materialized. In its place was something quieter, deeper, and infinitely more precious. Our new life was built in the small moments. It was in the way he started leaving a toothbrush in my bathroom without asking. It was in the way I learned to make his coffee just right, with a little too much sugar. It was in the comfortable, domestic rhythm of cooking dinner together, of sharing the quiet companionship of a Sunday morning, of him reading on the couch while I edited photos at my desk. The door to my bedroom, once a symbol of a threshold he crossed under a pretext, was now simply our door. The space in my bed was no longer a territory to be navigated with caution, but a shared home. One evening, months later, I was watching him sleep, the same way I had 100 times before. But this time, there was no anxiety, no secret longing, no fear. There was only a profound and peaceful sense of rightness. He stirred, his eyes fluttering open, and he gave me a lazy, sleep-softened smile. "What are you looking at?" he mumbled. "Just you," I said, my voice filled with a love so calm and steady it felt like the deepest part of the ocean. He scooted closer, wrapping an arm around my waist and pulling me against his chest, his favorite place to be. He kissed the top of my head. "Good," he murmured, already drifting back to sleep. "Stay." And I did. I stayed. We had found our way out of the gray, liminal space and into the clear, gentle light of day. It turns out that the most profound moments in life are not always the loud, dramatic ones. Sometimes they are the quietest. They are the whispered confessions in the dark, the shared silence of a comfortable room, the simple, steady presence of the person who, against all odds, has become your home. We had stopped running, both of us. We had learned to be still, and we began to heal, together, in the beautiful, honest quiet we had finally learned how to create.